Welcome to On the Soul's Terms podcast, a weaving of astrology, Greek mythology, and depth psychology. I'm Chris Skidmore, an astrologer, psychotherapist, and craniosacral therapist living in Ubud, Bali. My friend and colleague and fellow graduate of the Metavision Institute, Tina Bramley, joins me today for this episode. Tina is an ecotherapist, poet, dreamer, seeker, and consultant based in Brisbane, Myanmar. She has recently collaborated with 3 artists to create a deck of oracle cards and a book of poetry entitled Poetic Nature Cards for Contemplation and Connection. Tina enjoys a chat and loves nothing more than working with other people, both online and face-to-face, who want to deepen their connections with the more than human world. Contact her at hello@poetic.nature.com.au. Today we start by discussing the Poetic Nature project and interacting with it by pulling a card from the deck. The question we ask is, what's there to know at this time of year? The answer, joy, has become the cover of this podcast. It shows the image of a woman whose black hair is blowing around, seemingly in a state of reflection or perhaps grief and loss. Around her fly the Australian bird called the galah. The galah's ability to enjoy the moment in the midst of troubled times becomes the image we follow, which is the perfect setup for our Christmas special theme as we reflect on Christmases past that were in fact called the Feast of Fools, Saturnalia, or Chronalia. Times that paradoxically celebrated crusty old Saturn whilst turning the rules and roles of society upside down. Along the way, Tina shares her reflective poetry and gives us cause to pause as we head together into the solstice. Welcome back to On the Soul's Terms, and I'm really delighted today to be joined by Tina Bramley, who's an old friend of mine and someone that I met while I was studying at Metavision. The very first time that we met, we went onto this big kind of thing about buses and trains. I can't remember exactly what it was, but we ran metaphor on metaphor and went off on a real journey together on our very first chat in the kitchen while we were at this intensive for Metavision, learning to become process-oriented psychotherapists. And that's where we met, and we've gone from one thing to another after that. Tina's also been a really big supporter of the show On the Soul's Terms, and even back in the day when it was tending the Sunfire. So also just a great support and has given a lot of energy and love to this show. And it's a real privilege and honor to have her on the show. Tina, welcome.
Oh, welcome. It's such a treat, and really excited that we're in the same country. Mm-hmm. Which is a bit of a rare event. Nice to be seeing each other in relatively the same time zone. Yeah,
exactly. Only an hour off, and that's only because of daylight saving. So we're in the same basic area. I'm in Canberra at the moment. I'm sort of back home in Australia for Christmas and these kinds of things, and then Tina's just a little bit up the way, a little bit up the road, but there's a time zone thing between New South Wales and Queensland, and so we have just an hour's difference between us. And just before coming on, we were just having a little tune in, and you know, just yesterday, I was thinking, what should Tina and I talk about? What's our thing? And this really random thought came into my mind that we should do a Christmas special, and I'm like, that's ridiculous. And then, as Tina said, that Christmas special really reminds us of Star Wars and their fantastic Christmas special. Which was excellent, Life Day.
Yes. It was. I think it started with 5 minutes of the Wookiees just sort of making grunting noises at each other. Pretty surreal.
Well, cocaine's a hell of a drug, and I think that that particular time in history was driven by it, and certainly George Lucas giving over the reins for what became the Christmas special. If you want, you can go and watch that on YouTube if you want. That's a big if.
Don't pay for it to watch it for free.
Yeah, that's a big if. But so we are actually going to talk about this time of year, and the episode will be released into the solstice effectively. It'll be the 20th that it comes out. And it'll come out into that time of year that is actually solstice, which moves into these ancient festivals, which was called the Feast of Fools or Saturnalia or Cronalia, and probably has gone by many, many different names. It turns out that Tina is reading about that at the moment, and I'm reading a book by James Hollis called Under Saturn's Shadow. And so we've got this strange time of year that has now become about, I don't know, buying things. I'm not sure what it's about now. Definitely a fat guy in a red suit with a big beard. And even the confusion for us being Australian, but having ancestry that goes back to the Northern Hemisphere. And some of the confusion around that, where you've got this guy in very heavy winter clothes on a sled with reindeer that's popping into sometimes 40-degree Celsius days down here in Australia. So some of the confusions and some of the topsy-turviness of things. But in fact, the whole festival was a topsy-turvy time.
Yeah.
So we're going to get into that today. But first, I want to introduce Tina and some of what we wanted to talk about today, which is, well, I'll let you introduce yourself and tell us about the things that you're up to, Poetic Nature, and these beautiful projects that you're getting involved in.
Well, thanks, Chris. Yeah, so I, as you've already mentioned or hinted at, I'm a process-oriented psychotherapist. I've also moved more into ecotherapy in recent years, and now I work exclusively outside. I don't have an office, and which is interesting at this time of year with this weather. And I also, in my day job, I work as a consultant for an Aboriginal owned and led consultancy, which has been a really cool experience and definitely helped me further refine, what it means for me to be connected with nature and what that actually means. So really grateful for that. So yeah, I guess my big project of late, it probably started about 5 years ago in my mind, was I had this random idea that I wanted to create a set of oracle cards, and I had no idea what the theme of the deck was going to be, and I'd kept trying to come up with all of these really clever ideas, and even just the thought of having to write that many descriptions, left me feeling exhausted. And then one day I was just sitting up near a waterfall close to where I lived and had my feet in the water, and a poem just dropped into my head, and then basically the tap was turned on, and over the course of the next sort of 6 months or so, I wrote about 30 poems, and they were all nature inspired. And I realized that was my theme. So instead of having a bunch of cards and then descriptions that say, this is what this means and this is what you should do, it's more like, no, just have a bit of a read of this poem and let it wash over you and see what it wants to tell you.
Beautiful. Amazing. And such a great, knowing you for these years and knowing that creative component of yourself and of your life, and also, of course, trying to make things work in this world, right? I think that's a big, the sort of, if you're okay with me sharing pieces of your chart as we go, is that okay?
Sure. Go for it.
Because, Tina and I have done a little bit of astrology over the time as well and connected through that. But there's the Capricorn side and the Leo side, isn't there? Well, Capricorn, Cancer, Leo, maybe we could say. And certainly the dilemma that a lot of us face of having these visions and inspirations and things we'd love to do, and then just got to get the bills paid and got to get, just got to work, just got to grind at it. And the tension between those and how to sort of allow things just to come. What I really hear about what came through about the oracle cards and Poetic Nature was it was really a bottom-up experience, right? It just kind of like bubbled up from the spring.
Yeah.
It wasn't such a top-down, here's what I am doing. It was like the inspiration, the poems, and the way. And they're beautiful cards. You found such a great illustrator. I'll leave a link for people to check it out and have a look at what you do.
3 illustrators, actually.
Oh, was it 3 illustrators?
Yeah.
Oh, tell me about that. How did the 3 fates come together?
Well, two of them are actually artists that I'd worked with in our day jobs together. They were both graphic designers. So yeah, we were, so 2 of them what we shared in common was that this was our side gig and this was our outlet. And then another artist, I was just walking down the street and I noticed this little studio, and there were these absolutely beautiful paintings in the window, and one of them was of a mother and a baby koala. And it just absolutely grabbed me and, grabbed me by the heart and drew me in there to speak to her. And she was very excited about it. So it took us a while to all find our rhythm, and people came on board at different times. But yeah, eventually we all got there. They were terrified because the brief I gave them was so broad and they wanted a bit more prescription. I was like, no, read the poem, let it land. Yeah, and come up with something. And they did a beautiful job. And the so it's Lorena, Christine, and Sheridan. They've all got quite different artistic styles, but what really blows me away is just the way that they all came together so beautifully in the deck. There's not one there that, to me looks like it doesn't belong.
Mm. And so the poetry comes first and then the illustrations come off of the poetry is what I'm hearing.
That's right.
And then the cards are reflections. And so you may have a question just like you would for an oracle deck, and then pull one out and it gives you a chance to connect to something that you may not see, a bit like almost an I Ching style, perhaps.
Yeah, because what people say, because then it's not rhyming poetry, so it's more of it's like a story, and what people say is that it takes them into the story and takes them to another place, and they can imagine themselves in this setting or in this situation. So I guess what they do from a psychological perspective is they just offer a different lens for looking through, or looking at something from the perspective of another.
Beautiful. And I can really hear that, obviously I talk about it a lot on the show, but going into the dreaming mind in order to get some kind of medicinal something that is just not going to be achieved through the everyday logical mind. And so often we can be in that frame where we're just trying to work it out, we're just trying to get to the bottom of things, or if I can just figure this out. And it can be there can be a lot of resistance, especially in the Western mind, to approaching things from a different angle, or entering into a dreamscape, or entering into poetry, or entering into an image or a vision. It's like we've been really thoroughly trained out of that. And maybe that can be part of our Christmas special, but we've been very thoroughly trained out. The image in the end, or the symbol, was essentially demonized long ago. And that became something that you shouldn't do. And you really need to trust in the word of God sort of thing. This is how you get to the truth. And of course, instead of getting into the truth, it tends to lock you into a bit of a labyrinth of logical linear thinking that doesn't really produce something out of the soul. So it doesn't really give you something outside of the construct that's already there.
Yeah. And as you're saying that, what really comes to me is, I wonder if part of that is the root of that sense of not belonging that so many of us experience these days, where, there is almost that barrier in between you and your personal relationship with God, however you perceive God to be, because there's a book in between, and there's masters of ceremonies that all interpret that information for you and make sure that you're doing it in the right way. So I think there's what really came through to me as you were speaking then, Chris, was that sense of alienation that can that can come through that. Not and that's not even thinking about the fact that every other being that is not human is subjugated, and that we are set apart as well. And I think that's just so sad and so just so sick is the word that comes to mind.
I was only I woke up with the thought of, which sometimes I wake up with a thought like this of like, what are we? What are we? Because, and it's part again of this episode that we're doing together, where there is a tension point here, right? Of what it is to have our ancestry that goes back to these rituals, that goes back to the Northern Hemisphere, that goes back to the Northern sky and to the Northern lands, and yet to be in Australia where everything's flipped upside down. And it's very interesting to hear that you're working, say it again, it's with a Indigenous-led counselling?
No, it's a consulting.
Consulting. Okay.
Yes. So they do place strategy, which is about basically embedding or making sure, centering country in the way that the built environment is shaped. So, making sure that in Indigenous ways of being and knowing are actually reflected in the built environment.
Wow.
Yeah, which is very cool. And there's also the social impact and engagement side of things. And we also have an amazing team of researchers and evaluators. So, just a very interesting and exciting and lovely bunch of people to be working with.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a fascinating thing to hear all of the things that you're involved in and engaged in, which do seem to come from that bottom up model, right? Like learning from the earth and having the earth have its voice and getting back in touch. You know, like one of the symbolic creatures, I guess, of the show would be Chiron, and that the centaurs, and really the fascination with all of the centaurs and these wonderful hybrid beings. And the animal instinctual self that is still very much animal. And then the alienating force is like the consciousness that can come down on top of that in a sense. So you get the feeling like you're living on a planet rather than, emerging from a planet. Because essentially we are emerging from, and even all of our myths, even if it's Skyfather mythology, has emerged still from the earth, right? Like I go back to Gaia gave birth to Uranus, and Gaia is the earth mother and Uranus is the sky father. She gave birth to him, so there's something like anything that we come up with has originally come back from the earth and up. Yeah. And
they're all country.
Right.
There's no
way out of that. And so then how does it, Tell me a bit more of like, what does that look like to have country at the center? What is it? And I'm especially kind of, I guess my mind is like, what are the barriers that you would run into on the way?
Yeah. So I think it's certainly, I should say at the outset, I'm not a designing with country or a connecting with country framework expert, but one of the key elements of the designing with country approach is to actually work with cultural knowledge holders who live in the local area, and they're the keepers of the wisdom and the law, and just I think even just the power of the people who are actually designing the development, whatever that might be, understanding what is the history of this place, what are the stories of this place, what are the things that are important, to Indigenous people, what is it that you need to know in order to be designing in a way that is resonant with that story, with that country, with that, with those people. Yeah, it's hard to put into words, but I think a part of it is really about literally connecting in and understanding that there is so much more going on here than just plonking a building or a road or, a water treatment plant on a piece of land, that it's all connected. Where are the waterways? Where are the, what are the connections outside of this area? And also I think something else that's really needs to be taken into consideration is the legacy, of the work that's being done as well. What's the legacy going forward? What are we leaving for our children and grandchildren?
Yeah, so thinking forward and thinking less in terms of, I guess that can be the issue with this alien that has arrived into our conversation, can just see, here's something that we can do something with, and not seeing the Earth like Gaia as an alive being that also has its own systems that are incredibly complex, and they're very difficult to understand with the mind. Actually, that's why it doesn't go into words so easily. And if it doesn't go into words, then how's it going to go also into policy or politics or different, like it can't really fit into those if it can't be put into words. And so there's almost a scramble of earth-based knowing to get into the conversation, but how can it get into the conversation without being transformed or metamorphosized into the language of domination or the language of top down?
Yeah,
extractive. Top down is the way. Yeah, extractive, because top down is the way it's run. It's very complex, isn't it?
It is, and I'm this far along on the journey of getting my head around it all.
Yeah.
The more I learn, the more I realize I don't know.
Yeah, which is very confounding. Well, beautiful stuff. And maybe just coming back to poetic nature for a little bit. So could you give us like something of I'd love to just get more into the feel of the cards and the poetry and things. Is there anything that springs to you that you'd want to share more specifically about it?
Well, look, one thing I love to do is I've got the deck with me and the book with me. And one thing I love to do, especially when I'm online with people, is I'll say, look, I'm going to shuffle the cards. And then, you can tell me when it feels right for me to stop shuffling, and then maybe we could read a poem.
I love.
Yeah.
Yes,
so hold.
let's do that.
Hold. Great. So hold whatever question or whatever intention you want to hold in your mind, and then I'm just going to start shuffling and take as long as you like.
Okay. Well, because we're we're in a conversation that involves many others, I might just try to attune to what might be the question around. And I guess what springs to mind is kind of part of the intention for this episode is like, tell me about this time of year as we release this into the solstice, and give me a sense of this moment in time.
Beautiful question.
And so you're shuffling.
I'm shuffling.
And let's stop there.
This has been coming up so much recently, and it's just delightful. So the theme of this card is joy.
It's joy.
And
okay.
Yeah. And the being at the center is galah.
Amazing. Well, what I'm going to do, and I may or may not cut this section out, but I'll take that image and I might make that the cover of the podcast.
Lovely.
So then for people listening, you can look down at your phone now and see the cover of this podcast, and it is this card that we just chose. So just have a look at that and have a feel of that. You may even want to pause and go right into that image. And then Tina will tell us the poem behind it and underneath it. Yes.
And I think it just fits so well with what we were talking about earlier, Chris, around authenticity. Okay. Galah sits on the power line, head tucked into her chest as the rain comes down in buckets. For an hour or more, she has been caught out in the open, sodden and bedraggled, a most pathetic sight. The rain finally passes. You watch her drying in the sun. You realise it is not an easy life in the wild, and soberly ponder her predicament. Weather is the least of her concerns. Shotguns, predators, poisoned feed are just a few of the dangers and hardships that stalk her at every turn. You reflect that you wouldn't be surprised if she was quite a sad character, given all that is on her plate. You imagine a glum, disenchanted little heart beating within her delicate pink breast. Galah looks down at you from her lofty perch, a glint in her eye. She lifts one foot and drops backward, now hanging upside down, screeching. A deranged high-wire acrobat. Her show isn't over yet. She wings her way to the nearest house, with 20 of her closest friends in tow. Rain is over. Time to play. A suburban yard becomes a carnival. A roof is a slippery slide. Whee! All the way down to the gutter. Then back to the top to ride again. Nipping Cockatoo's rump on the way. Now rolling on the ground, belly up, flinging a piece of bark with her beak in a solo game of catch. Stripping the blossoms from a freshly planted wattle, all the while squawking with delight, living up to her clownish reputation. Don't act like a galah. is the criticism often levelled at someone judged to be foolish, too much, too rambunctious, too energetic, too enthusiastic, too childlike, too loud. Galah's calls become deafening, daring you to tell her to settle down. For her, there is no such thing as too much play, too much fun, too much colour. In this uncertain world, where it could be all over tomorrow, she will grab joy with both feet and celebrate life whenever she has the chance.
Wow. Well, of all the perfect sets of images for what we wanted to talk about, and remembering that going into that, I was just asking about solstice and a time ruled by Saturn and Capricorn season upon us. This is just a perfect poem / story / image. Even the image is really perfect for, what I've talked about quite a lot on the show, and I'd love to get into it with you and your experience of what it is to be Capricorn rising and, what is Capricorn energy? Because we head into this time of year that in the Northern Hemisphere was going into the dead of winter. It's the solstice means the sun stands still. The soul is the SOL is the sun. Solstice means the sun stands still and turns around. But there's also this image of rebirth within it, where we go to the darkest time of the year. And then a lot of solar mythology is about resurrection. So there's a death, and then, for 3 days of this time of year, there's a death of the sun. The sun god, or the son of God, is dead, and then 3 days later rises again, which is why on the 25th of December, generally, it's considered to be the rebirth, which is what we celebrate today as Christmas. But 25th of December was the birthday of Jesus and also the birthday of Dionysus. And so there was something very specific about that day that went to the darkest time and then the rebirth. And there's something about the galah here and the attitude and these old festivals and these ancient ways of celebrating this time of year. Because ultimately, even in early Roman times, the 21st of December was the end of time. And then for a good 2 months or so, you were beyond time, you were out of time, there wasn't any time. And so you wait for somebody to ring the bell to say time has begun again, which will be a few months later when there's a bit more sunshine around. But in that time, it's like all bets are off, kind of like you're out of time. There's no clocks, there's no calendars. And that's why actually in the calendar of today, September, October, November, December is Sept, Oct, Nov, Des, which is 7, 8, 9, 10. But those months are all actually the 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th. So they're all 2 months off. So we still exist with a calendar that is Sept, Oct, Nov, Des, which is not referring to the right. That's why when I really got that when I was teaching English to Taiwanese kids, and they just kept saying October for August. It's like, it's not October, And then I was like, wait a second, they've instinctively picked up that the Oct is the 8. They've instinctively got it actually more than I got it. They're like, this has nothing to do with Emperor Augustine here. We are in October. And so it's fascinating because the kid mind picks it up. But so we have this poem. I'd really love to hear your reflections first on the poem. And then, you're also in the process of reading this book about all these times, Saturnalia and all these times, and this particular time of the year. So I don't have a specific question for you, but more like passing the mic and getting the sense of your reflection on both the poem and I just feel like it's so Capricorn, this poem. It's so Saturn, and it gives you the sense of the other side of Saturn because there's something very joyful and playful and it'll screech at you, but there's a beautifully fun side to Capricornian energy that I don't think gets much press.
Yeah. I guess thinking about it, one of the first things that jumped out at me is that idea of, that there's a certain expectation on how you should feel or how you should be given what people are observing. And then there's your own inner world and your reality and your attitude. So that really jumped out at me. But the other thing that I've realized as you've shone that light of Capricorn on it is that this is in a way as a conversation between the dark, the dark side of Capricorn, that side that can be the really highly critical, controlling, authoritarian, don't do that, don't do this, you shouldn't be mucking around. And the other one that's actually, there's something incredibly practical about galah. She's like, well, I could be dead tomorrow, so I'm here to have a good time as well, because the opportunity has presented itself. And I love that. I've never thought of this as a conversation between, the two sides of Capricorn before, but that's what's presenting itself to me now.
Yeah, and I mean the first line, it's a bit like the Frog King, right? Like the youngest princess is playing with her golden ball by a dark forest. It's got that energy because she's on an electric she's on an electric line, and it's raining. So it's like, to me, it's very much like the first line of the Frog King, because it puts you in like, oh, here's someone playful and innocent and joyful, but you know where they are. They're at somewhere very dangerous. And of course, this time of year in the Northern Hemisphere was like, well, will we survive? It's actually the question mark. There's a lot of winter, and you're not going to get any crops, and maybe snowing, and there's no animals around. And if you haven't prepped for this, if you haven't done the Capricornian work earlier, around the harvest moon and things, if you haven't done that work, you could die here. And that's the very stark reality of this time of year, isn't it?
Well, it's so true. It's probably not so much in recent weeks, but in the last couple of months, this is when all of a sudden you just start seeing all of the dead birds just randomly lying on the road, and you can just see they're the ones that didn't quite make it through that, sort of survival of the fittest spring moving into summer period. Oh my gosh. And every day when we've been walking the dogs, there's actually been a magnificent crow that's died, that somebody had actually laid out ceremonially on the footpath in front of the school, the primary school. And so occasionally I'd go and visit, and I'd leave some flowers, and I thought someone's obviously, seen this bird that has probably was hit by a car or something like that, or, not sure what happened. But what really surprised me is that it is now actually gone through its full, decay process, and it's almost all gone. There's a few feathers left, and there's a few little bits of wing and bone, but nobody removed it. It's out the front of a primary school.
Oh my goodness.
So there's some very Capricornian stuff going on there around, no, you need to look at this. This is the reality. This is life. Life is death.
Yes.
So yeah, that's really that's always struck me that, how on earth did somebody not, freak out and go, oh, we don't want the children to be upset. But instead it's actually, this crow is part of the landscape now, and it's, a member of the community and has been treated as such.
That's so great, because I can, crows, if you're unaware, crows are sacred to Saturn and are a bird of Capricorn, and that's the energy of the times. And so we have this crow. One of the reasons that Tina and I have decided to journey on this particular way is because behind Tina was this big crow that came in while we were like, well, what should we talk about today? And then there it was. And we just mentioned Saturn and Saturnalia, Cronus and all these things. And there he was. And once we'd decided, he flew off like that was his business. And now we have this decaying crow at a primary school. So again, we've got this, we got the child. This is the thing. It's like the Jungians have determined this as the puer-senex opposition, the tension between the eternal youth and the old one, because they're, the older one is approaching that death realm, and the younger one has just come from that great place. And that's why the grandparent and the grandchild, it's such a special relationship when you put them together. And oftentimes within the puer-senex discussion, we're looking at that oppositional tension, but we can't see the way, like through Capricorn, that they actually connect really beautifully in the same way that this princess, this young princess is by the dark forest. It's just where she likes to be. That's where she likes to play with her golden ball. It's the same with the galah. Likes being in a kind of a dangerous situation and dangerous position because it kind of likes being a bit closer to death. And this time of year, at least in the northern hemisphere, it's interesting because we're hearing those images from the southern hemisphere where we're going spring into summer. In the northern hemisphere, we're going from fall or autumn into winter, into the very dead of the year. But there is a mirroring on either side because there is a danger on either side, right? There's a danger in the middle of summer and the longest days of the year, the hottest days of the year, and there's a danger on the other side. So there's a danger when there's too much light, and there's a danger when there's too much darkness. And these are the times of the year in the solstice when we've got the most extreme conditions.
Yeah, it's the intensity, isn't it? And I often thought about that. I always thought of summer, like summer I see as the harshest season in Australia and winter is the harshest season in the northern hemisphere. So again, there's a synergy there.
Yeah.
Because, when it starts to move into those cooler months, there's a sigh of relief because, winter ain't really winter here. It's that's kind of more our summer. In terms of when things actually start to ease off and the pressure eases off a little bit and you can breathe again and you can go outside for more than 5 minutes without, spontaneously combusting and being attacked by a magpie or whatever other weird stuff wants to happen. Yeah, there's a certain level of, I don't know, I always feel like I'm kind of coming back out into the world somewhat when it's when winter starts to come around, when summer's the time we're all hiding inside from protecting ourselves from the elements,
right?
Which in this situation tends to be heat.
Yeah, so you still get the dead crow sort of imagery. So we still are heading into that Capricornian time. It's not like we're heading into Cancer just because we're on the other side of the world. We still have the same sun, same zodiac. So that's really interesting how it flips around. I hadn't thought about that until this conversation. Like the harshness in Australia is actually this time. And as you say, we come out into that's better. Maybe, in both sides, it's like those equinoxes that are the times when things are changing, when, things come out. But I'm really fascinated with this idea that the crow was left to decay in front of a primary school and nobody freaked out and moved it. I feel like that's a beautiful sign of the times changing in a way.
This is weeks, and this is weeks I've been watching this process unfold.
Wow.
And, there's been a changing of the season while this has been happening because the Melaleuca hadn't bloomed yet when this crow first appeared on the footpath, and then it started to bloom. So the experience has been getting out of the car and just feeling like you're walking through a cloud of honey, that beautiful honey smell that you get with Melaleuca. And then, walking down the road and there's this crow, going through its process, weeks and weeks and weeks.
Wow. Amazing. And maybe we can then sort of take this into the archetypal and the time of year, right? So, yeah, I wonder what you've been picking up from your reading about this festival that would go on for really thousands of years. I mean, it seems to go back into time immemorial. It seems to just keep going back because the Christians had it as the Festival of the Fools, where they would have a little girl instead of the priest and making donkey noises, and you could have a donkey in the church and things like that. And instead of like all the Latin rigmarole and process, there'd be everybody, instead of answering with amen, would answer with donkey noises in the church. The slaves were made the masters and the masters the slaves. So there was this turning around of roles. Every 7 years there'd be a forgiveness of debt, 7 being a Saturn number. So all of these things occurred during this time and really a complete shakeup. And it would often be 12 days, which is where we get the 12 days of Christmas. But there was a time when it was the solar calendar and the lunar calendar had this time in between. So there's a gap between the solar and lunar. So then the solar calendar would end and you'd have to wait, or the lunar, you'd have to wait for the sun again to be reborn. And so that was again time out of time. So it has all these themes in it. And there was a lot of wildness and revelry and madness and crazy stuff going on. It was Festival of the Fools, Saturnalia, Chronalia, and I don't know what before then, but I'm sure that the Greeks didn't just like make it up. I'm pretty sure they inherited it from somewhere. What have you been finding out about this?
Well, I'm not too far into the book, but by the way, it's called The Dead of Winter, and it's by Sarah Sarah Clegg. So yeah, it's a good read.
Okay.
There is some people criticize her for being a bit of a tourist, but I quite enjoy that, because she's taking a bit of an anthropological stance to, these festivals. And I think what's upsetting people is that, we're not used to being looked at anthropologically. Those are we're used to doing that to everyone else. So I quite enjoyed that idea of, look at this strange thing that's happening, because she went, I think one of the latest chapters that I read, she'd just been to Venice, to the masquerade ball, and was reflecting on that experience. I don't know, I guess what really strikes me is, that idea of, yes, it is a really big shake-up, but then at some point things kind of snap back to how they were and everyone goes back to playing their roles again. And I think, in our very diluted way that we do things in our culture, it's you can see it reflected in the Christmas party. Like there's nothing more potentially explosive than a Christmas party, right? It's there's no other time of the year where a work function has the potential to go that far south. The photocopier has never been in more danger of being, sat on by a naked backside, or the person who's considering maybe, doing something that they shouldn't with their married co-worker, just suddenly all of that restraint just drops away. And I wonder whether, there is a bit of a Saturnalian archetype playing itself out at those times.
Yeah, I think so, because that was one of the things. I mean, it depends on which cultural backdrop you're in, and it seems to be the more strict and the more shut down the culture, the more wild Saturnalia seemed to get. It seemed to be, and like they'd have like, all contracts are off during this time, including marriage contracts, including right. Relationship contracts.
So giddy up.
Yep. Yeah, suddenly like, boom, it's all on. And then you just forget about it, I guess. You just go back, as you say, it snaps back and everybody
it's a reset.
Picks up their roles again. So, there was a critique of it that it kind of enforces the roles in some ways, because it gives you a break and then reinforces it once you're back in there. But I think in some ways, rather that than not having it at all, because there's especially the part that I was really most interested in is, Saturn's such an interesting character, because this part where there's every 7 years is a forgiveness of the debt, that resets the game, mass forgiveness of debt. It resets the game, and it is a game. Economics is a game.
Yeah, it's the rebirth, isn't it? Because you've got the tabula rasa, starting again.
Yeah, and you get to start again, and you get to reset, and you get to, okay, I made some mistakes in that 7 years, but that's not the rest of my life, and that's not my whole ancestry or my whole descendants are going to be punished for that, right? For mistakes that I might have made in certain ways. And it's funny, the modern mind, you say this to people and they're like, well, wouldn't people just go nuts in like year 6, rack up all these debts and things? And it's like, yeah, well, that would be the result of this. That would be how far we would go, because we're so locked into we don't get these breaks anymore, So we think that way because we're also projecting onto this our own culture and the lack of this, right? But actually, I think the truth is, like, these are still the human beings you have to deal with in the next year. They don't just become other human beings.
That's the thing I never got, and I probably, I don't want to overthink it, but that movie, The Purge.
I don't know The Purge.
Oh, so The Purge is, I guess it's Saturnalia, but taken to a horror.
Okay.
A horror genre. So you'll love this. You'll love this concept. It's they're basically, there's one day of the year where you can just basically go nuts and you can do whatever you like. You can commit murder. You can.
Okay. Yeah.
But I always thought, well, isn't that a bit awkward? And then you go back to work next week and, like, oh yeah, poked my boss's eye out and I, killed his dog, or half my family's been wiped out because the neighbors like broke into my house. And it's like, you still got to go. And apparently the concept is that it's meant to promote, prosperity and peace all the rest of the year. So it's good for society to have this purge. But yeah, that you hit the nail on the head for me. It's like, how does that work when you have to reset? Like when you actually go back to your role?
So I think it'd be like festive. See, if it's intact, if the culture's intact and it's working well, then there'd be a festivity to it. But there's also an understanding that then I have to go back to these things. Like, for instance, if the master and the slave situation, it's like you can take it to a certain level, and then you realize you got to go back to that, and that will be remembered. Actually,
yeah, don't push your luck.
Don't push it too far.
Which is so Capricornian, right?
Which is so Capricornian.
How far can I push this? Yeah, where's the edge?
Where's the edge? That's exactly Saturn's role, right? Where is the edge? And if we put the edge too far in, then it actually creates a lot of, you said spontaneous combustion earlier, which I really liked as a, it's that sort of thing, the combustion, like people are too tense, people are too intense, and they can't, there's no outlet, there's no way out. But I think that if you ran this a few times, if you just ran it a few years in a row, yes, the first few would be complete chaos and madness. And then people would be like, that was interesting. That didn't really work out for me going quite that far. There's a new edge, right? Like it's this sort of thing I always think within this part of the zodiac, we're exploring edges. And we're exploring how far can you take certain things. But we need to move in that sense. The model that I've got is like man-made control, chaos, which is the absence of man-made control, and then cosmos, which is the emergence of some kind of cosmic order that doesn't involve the human beings. It does involve them, but it involves them just as much as any other animal. It's like puts us back into relationship with nature, as we were talking about before, because if you look out into the solar system, like if you're looking out into the solar system at night 5,000 years ago, you might be thinking like, wow, what a chaotic mess of stars. It's beautiful, but it has no order to it. That might be your assumption. Every night it's just like a madness of like a spraying of, like in the Greeks, they saw it as Heracles and Hera. Heracles was on Hera's breast and then bit down too hard on the breast, and she pulled him away, but he was so strong that he's like pulled all the milk out, and then all that milk sprayed out to become the Milky Way. That sort of like chaotic thing. That's why we call it the galaxy. Galah is milk. So the galaxy is like all this milk has sprayed out. So there's this big chaos, but actually you look a little closer, you spend time observing, and there's this exquisite order. You can see where the planets were 5,000 years ago pretty accurately, pretty much to the minute. And you can go into the future and see that too, pretty much to the minute. It's not chaos in the sense of disorder. It's very ordered, but it doesn't involve human ordering.
Yeah, chaos and randomness are two different things, and I think it's very easy to get those mixed up.
Yeah.
But I think too what you're talking about is, goes back to that issue that Michael Meade always discusses, which is that, we have an adolescent culture.
Yes.
So of course, when we're not great at being able to moderate in those situations when we do get let off the leash. There's experimentation, there's, things are going to go wrong.
Right. We don't, it's like Hillman said as well, colleague of Meade, as we know. Hillman said, it's not so much that we have a patriarchy, it's that we have a puerarchy. Mm-hmm. The issue isn't the fathers, it's all these kind of boyish ones out there that are running the world, which is pretty evident.
Having tantrums and
I want more of this. It's like, okay, so there's the absence of the leveling, steadying forces in the world, and that's actually because of such a lockdown of consciousness. Such a lockdown of consciousness will give fantasy material like this Purge movie that turns the whole thing into a horror movie. Because that's all we can come up with in a way.
That's right. It's a bit, it's a lack of imagination, isn't it?
It's a lack of imagination. We can't come up with what would be there to level anything out. Where would people find their limits? There wouldn't be any. It'd be complete free fall. It's like, actually, if you look at a group of humans when they're free, they don't kill each other.
That's right.
They don't tend to do that. That's not actually in the natural human programming. Oh, I should just kill all these people that I really love. Or
I'm going on holidays. I'm just going to go on a bit of a spree.
I'm going to go murdering for a bit, just for fun. See what that's like. No, it's not. That's not really what we do. We're murderous. We murder for food, and we murder for war. But generally, the human being isn't like that. But we'll turn into that maybe if they're locked down too much, and then we get the opposite of the Capricorn, where the childishness comes kind of launching out of, right, like, which is part of the chaotic that needs to lead to the cosmos. So that's kind of the dilemma that we're in, because eventually this whole Feast of Fools thing got shut down by the church just a couple of 100 years ago, but it went right through the Middle Ages. That's what's fascinating to me, is that it was Chronalia, then Saturnalia, then went all through Rome, and then really got lived through to about, I think it was the 17th or 18th century. It was still being practiced.
Yes. Yeah. And what they particularly didn't like was the dressing up like animals, wearing the animal masks. That's the bit that they would always complain about in the pamphlets that were going around. It was, standing in the kitchen dressed as beasts.
Interesting. So this is again Capricornian, right? Because one of the two figures that are associated with Capricorn is Saturn, which sounds a whole lot like Satan, and Pan, who's a goat god, and both of those figures are clearly devil, right? So the devil seems to sort of arise out of Capricornian, like a projection onto Capricorn consciousness, actually.
Yeah. And it's, don't know why, but I was sort of thinking, gosh, this isn't very Christmassy, but it's like devil, often depicted in a red suit. He's got the, it's kind of like the now I'm thinking of that movie Bad Santa, who was kind of the devil incarnate, but wearing a Santa hat, wasn't he? So
well, that's the thing about the modern day. It's like also cleaned up, and so we've got this benevolent thing and benevolent stuff going on, and it's like, but it's kind of like dying images, isn't it? I mean, I'd love to not, I don't want to be the curmudgeon about it. I really don't. And I do enjoy this time of year, and I enjoy getting, this year I will actually be back in my hometown of Perth, and I'm enjoying being able to be there with my father, and, going to, actually, funnily enough, I'm going to a Christmas event with him, which are the people I used to go to church with.
Wow.
I mean, these people don't go to church now, I don't think, but I used to see them every Sunday at church, and there was something really beautiful about meeting at the cathedral. We'd go through whatever they were talking about in church. I never remember, but I do remember the sense of community, the sense of something very wholesome to do. It was often, I remember like these beautiful mornings, it's early on a Sunday. We do this and we go back to our lives. It's like it's a time of reflection and a time of reverence, and then a time of community building. And it's done very cleanly, in that there's no alcohol involved. In Australia, there's usually alcohol involved. There certainly will be on Christmas Day this year. And just that, that sort of, there's a beauty and a purity in that. And I do miss that. I'm very aware of missing that. I'm missing that one time a week of an hour in a church, and I don't get, there's pomp, there's revelry, there's not revelry, there's pomp though. There's costumes.
There's a sense of occasion. There's reverence.
Yeah. And there's a guy up the front in a robe, just kind of like calling on a bit of ancient wisdom, or the wisdom that was available to him at the time. And it was often quite beautiful what they'd come up with. I remember Monsignor Nestor. I was an altar boy in that church, and I remember being quite moved sometimes by the kinds of things he'd reflect upon. And it's like places for reflection have sort of also disappeared. I don't know where the places, I mean, we can create them as individuals and we can create them as small communities, but culturally, places of reflection seem to have, at least in my world and in my observation, and which is very subjective, of course, seem to have sort of like receded back And I do miss the opportunity to be in a temple. So that's the word contemplation, right? Temple's right in the middle of that word. And to be in contemplation, even just giving it an hour, where that's what I'm going to do every week. That's also a different kind of reset. It's not the kind of reset that Saturnalia is talking about, but it's maybe all those other Sundays that go on where there's or the Sabbath or that sort of break from things where you do get to contemplate.
Mm. You've just reminded me of a poem I wrote a couple of years ago, and it was inspired by a time that I basically was out bushwalking and I fell over and cut my knee, and I was so annoyed because that wasn't how it was supposed to be. This was supposed to be a really nice experience. Yeah, so it was like going to church, but then ending up hobbling away because someone played a bit of a trick on you.
Well, it's very interesting because Saturn rules the knees as well. So you sort of like get that Saturnian wound sort of happens. And, Saturn's the one that sets up these institutions in a way. And we got to remember about Saturn while we're on the topic of that Saturn did rule over the golden age. And so he's a very interesting character because we just generally think about Saturn or Cronus as being a tyrant, being sort of evil in some ways. I mean, he does castrate his father and eat his children, so, not a great track record. And then he's the big tyrant that Zeus has to come up against. But it's kind of like just mulling it around a little bit about, but so why is it then that he rules over the golden age? What is it and he's also he's an agent of Gaia, right? I mean, essentially he's an agent of Gaia. So my sense is that Saturn, I'd love to hear your reflection with your Capricorn rising, Saturn as your chart ruler. But my sense of Saturn is he's there to remind us of the limits. We may not want to know about the limits. We may not want to hear that. But ultimately and that's perhaps why he ruled over the golden age, because it was like, okay, everybody work within your limits and this place will be fine. If we go outside of the limits, when Jupiter or Zeus takes over, it slowly goes from one grade down from the golden age to the next. It goes silver, bronze, iron. And, the iron age, everybody was toiling under the weight of the world kind of thing.
Yeah. Limits. I've burned out a couple of times, over the last 30 odd years. I've definitely had it probably I'd say three times. So yeah, probably about every 10 years, a period where I would just hit the wall. And it usually comes from, just not being in connection with my body and not being in connection with really anything around me, just kind of blindly pushing through. So yeah, there's something about, and if I reflect on that falling down, like literally being brought back down to earth and back to what is around you, what is, the reality of things, which I think goes to what we were talking about before we started this morning around the, the sensate versus the intuitive and the tension there. And I definitely, I guess being a Leo sun as well, there's definitely the intuitive, heart-led part. And then there's the part that's, also has to be very practical and organized. And there's constant tension between those parts, and the ambition and then versus the, no, you need, you can't do all of that right now. And lots of toing and froing. And then of course there's Cancer moon in there just going, oh, it's all just too overwhelming. And I can't, I'm not able to, I shouldn't try and feel any of it, because if I do, then it's all just going to come crumbling down. So that's kind of the conversation that goes on, I think, with those three. The Cancer moon has really come into her own in the last few years. So there's certainly more balance there now. I think the Leo sun is very happy that the Cancer moon is more engaged, and the Capricorn ascendant can kind of start to pull back a little bit on the reins and doesn't, it doesn't have to be that persona doesn't have to be the one that's always on show. Sometimes the other parts are allowed to peek out and say hello as well.
Yeah, and I'm just kind of drawn into that as you're telling that story of your chart and therefore your life. It's like every now and again, there has to be a restructuring, right, in order to kind of accommodate the needs of the sun and the moon. And that Capricorn or Saturn can be either really good at that or really bad at that. You know, if it's not able to adjust and to change, that's, I think, a recipe for the burnout, where we haven't been able to change our structures. And now coming back to the Saturnalia, you know, this is a time of changing your structures, because if time was to end here and then start again when they ring the bell, which could be a few months from now, but you never really know when it's going to be, then in that time, you're really going deep into the interior world. And I think that's what this time of year, although it's known for its rambunctiousness and we make horror movies about it and we write about it like it'd be this, you know, kind of terrifying thing or whatever we think it might be. I think it'd be really fun, that actual festival. But then you go into the winteriness of it and you go into the deep interior, or if it's really hot outside, you go into the deep interior of the cave or whatever it is to avoid some of that heat. And then in that deep interior space, you reorganize and you think, well, how was that last 365? You know, how'd that go? What did I do? And you actually get a chance to pause and reflect on that. Because I know for me, you know, Saturn's huge in my chart. And if my Saturn and my North Node are together in Virgo in the 10th house, which is like in the career house. And if I'm not, it's not necessarily, I can be very productive and very busy and still not burn out. But I need to restructure every now and again. And sometimes I'm working off an old structure that I haven't looked at for a while. That'll burn me out.
Yeah.
That'll burn me out, because I'm like, I haven't restructured this. I haven't reorganized things. I've got new things coming in, but I haven't kicked out the old things, right? Like I haven't let the old crow die. Yeah,
like I've got the, you know, I've got all this new programs I want to run, but I'm still clunking along on Windows, 5.0.
That's so funny. I had Windows 7 running until about a couple of months ago, actually, on my computer, on my Windows side of my computer, which I need for my astrology software. So like that kind of literalized itself. I'm now on Windows 11, which is like, this is not an ad for Windows, by the way. Windows sucks, but at the same time, operating software. Yeah, like what am I operating off of here? And does it work? Or does it just not work? And I think if it just doesn't work, it's like we're trying to change the structure on the run in this culture, right? Because there isn't a break. There isn't a break at this time of year. I mean, we do have sort of like some things built in, but it's just go, 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 right? We go from the work life to the family life often, and we run around there, and then we're sort of like, thank God I get to go back to work. Oftentimes this is the experience, right?
Well, yeah, because you know, particularly when it comes to family, that idea of interiority can be really scary. Like, who the hell wants to go there? Wow. And investigate, go dig through all those, you know, deep, dark cupboards from childhood.
Enter the labyrinth. Yeah, who wants to do that? So we can go, but it is a time of the year, and I think the solstices in particular, the equinoxes too in their own way, you know, but particularly the solstices that are that time when our nature, our human nature, is trying to pull us towards deep reflection. And we may not want to go there. And that may be fair enough. But if we don't go there, time starts again, and the thing you didn't do in the interior is not done. That's right. So often it'll show up. And it'll show up. Wearing a different pair of pants in your life. Yeah. Disguising itself as one of these beasts, perhaps. Like, oh God, this situation again. Not this, because there hasn't been a reflection and an interior view. So it's interesting to have the morphing of Christmas, because I do not think of it. This is one thing I can say for sure, subjectively, I guess. I do not see it as a reflective time in our culture, at least. I think it can be, and I you know, credit to Melanie Reinhardt, who runs this thing called the 12 Holy Nights. She goes through all the signs of the zodiac, and she actually begins in Capricorn and she ends in Sagittarius. So it's like you begin in Capricorn, you go through one day after another of 12 days of deep reflection. And, you know, that to her is like all things off except for this process of 12 holy nights. And she's obviously based that on a reflective process. And I've done that with her a few times, and it's very powerful. I did it with her in person. I was the yoga teacher. I'm not a yoga teacher, but I was the yoga teacher on that. And before each morning, Melanie and I would organize the yoga to be that sign's yoga, which you can imagine was very fun. So we did like Capricorn yoga, and then Aquarius yoga, and then Pisces yoga. You imagine all the different things that happened. And, you know, it was actually quite good being not actually a yoga teacher during that, because I got to really be free to do all sorts of different things and hopefully not injure anybody.
Hopefully. There's always risks with Saturnalia.
Yeah, exactly.
Yoga teachers,
responsibility for that.
Astrologers have become yoga teachers, and yoga teachers are flying planes, and it's just all dogs are marrying cats. It's just all happening.
It's part of the risk. Well, beautiful. This all feels, I feel us kind of like coming gently towards a close here. Do you feel that?
Yeah.
What have we not said that we could say?
Well, I've had a poem, a very short poem that I wrote recently that's not part of the book. Actually, no, I wrote it a while ago, but it comes back around because I had a very, you know, that snake shedding its skin kind of experience where you really do feel that you're just turning into goop for a while and then popping back out.
Yeah, we call it Pluto here.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yes, let's not get into that. We had that conversation offline as well. But yes, he's just left my first house after 16 years, and I must say, don't let the door hit your butt on the way out, Pluto. Thanks very much. Oh gosh, I just realised there's a little photo on my phone that I should send you that is very Saturnalian. It's a little, like one of those kind of. It's like a carved head, and he's got a funny little expression on his face, and he's got a Christmas bauble hanging off his ear. So I'll send that. Amazing. I'll send that to you.
Yes, please.
Got competition for the cover image.
Well, we've decided earlier in the episode on the cover image, so you have to send me that one too. And I might just include that image down in the show notes if that's possible. We'll see.
For sure. Okay. So this is called Shedding. So I'm wishing everybody a restorative and renewing Christmas this year.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Milky, smooth as silk. Raw flesh peeks out between strips of brown, crunchy bark. Tree is shedding her skin. She is ragged and luminous. Splashes of yellow and green contrasting with her alabaster newness. Snake is on his own journey, scales glistening, his old wrapping disintegrating in the breeze. He is shiny and exhausted, taking a breather under tree's sheltering canopy. The two share a bond of seasonal vulnerability and betwixtness. I feel a primal tug of kinship. For what feels like an eternity, I have been shedding, wondering if this discomfort, this discombobulation, this sensitivity will ever give way to robustness and vitality. Tree and snake tell me that this too will pass and new growth is inevitable, but not to expect this will be the last time I shed my skin. After all, life is more about cycles than milestones.
Wow, that's beautiful, Tina. Thank you so much for that. And what a perfect way for us to all head into this time of year, all head into the solstice and then into Christmas and then into this apparently new year, the time of Janus or January where we're looking forward and back. And so the images are still around, the images are still here with us. And certainly the snake and the tree can come with us into this time of year. And thank you so much for sharing of your soul and your poetry and your images and the nature in the background that no one else can see but me, but, the crow who decided to tell us what to talk about today. And, Poetic Nature is the name of your thing and your oracle cards and I definitely got a lot of poetic nature out of our chat today. So thank you for joining me.
Thank you. It was very, very restorative and very rich. So appreciate that. Thank you for helping me refill my cup.
I'm glad. Thanks, Tina. And that's Tina Bramley, everybody. You can find her. Well, where can they find you, Tina? You tell them.
Okay, so I am a bit of a troglodyte. So I'm on Facebook, and my business page is called Edgewise Illuminating Counselling and Psychotherapy.
Love it. Edgewise. And may we all get wise about our edges as we move through Capricorn season into the time of Saturn and find out where the limits are. Thanks, Tina.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to On the Soul's Terms podcast. To support the show, please consider leaving a 5-star review, sharing with friends, or becoming a patron at patreon.com/onthesoulsterms. Until next time.